Imagine standing in a packed arena, the crowd roaring so loud that the very air seems to shake. The tension is thick, the lights bright, and all eyes are on one man, a man who can end a fight in mere seconds with a single punch. A man who walks into the ring not just as a fighter, but as a force of nature. That man is Mike Tyson. But before the world knew him as the most feared heavyweight champion in boxing history, before the knockout reels and the championship belts, there was just a kid from the roughest streets, fighting for survival long before he ever stepped into a ring. His story isn't just about boxing. It's about power, pain, redemption, and the price of greatness. Because to understand Mike Tyson, you have to go back to the very beginning. Long before the fame, long before he was Iron Mike, there was a boy growing up in a world that didn't offer second chances. The streets weren't just dangerous, they were ruthless. Every day was a fight, and if you weren't strong enough, you didn't make it. He learned that lesson young. Too young. The world didn't wait for him to grow up, it threw him into the fire, and he had no choice but to survive. Fighting wasn't something he chose. It was something he had to do. Before the gloves, before the bright lights, there were just fists. And fear. And the understanding that if he didn't hit first, he'd be the one getting hit. The streets taught him that. They shaped him, hardened him. But they also introduced him to the one thing that would change his life forever: boxing. He didn't look like the future heavyweight champion at first. He wasn't the tallest or the biggest kid in the gym, but he had something else. Something that couldn't be measured. It wasn't just power, it was rage. A deep, burning fury that needed a way out. And when he stepped into the ring for the first time, it became clear this kid wasn't just fighting. He was unleashing. Under the watchful eye of a legendary trainer, the raw, untamed street fighter became something else. Something controlled. Something dangerous. He trained like a machine, like a man possessed. While other kids were out playing, he was in the gym, punching, moving, learning. His coach saw something in him, something rare. This wasn't just another fighter. This was a kid with the potential to change the sport forever. And then came the fights. The rise. The knockouts. The moments that left the world in shock. He didn't just win, he destroyed. Opponents weren't just beaten, they were overwhelmed, taken apart in ways that made even seasoned fighters hesitate. One after another, they fell. 1 round, 2 rounds. Sometimes less. People didn't just come to see him box, they came to see how fast he'd end it. But with success came something else, something darker. The fame, the money, the pressure. The more he won, the more the world watched. The more they expected. And outside the ring, life got complicated. The fighter, who once had nothing now, had everything, and with that came problems of a different kind. Because the thing about being on top is that everyone wants to see how far you can fall. And for Mike Tyson, the journey to the top was only half the story. The real test? That was still to come. This is the story of Mike Tyson, the rise, the fall, the redemption. The victories, the defeats, and the moments that defined him. The kid from the streets who became the baddest man on the planet. And just when the world thought they had him figured out, he proved that his story was far from over. Mike Tyson didn't just fight in the ring, his whole life had been a fight. Even when he wasn't throwing punches, he was battling something. Expectations, pressure, his own demons. The moment he became heavyweight champion, everything changed. The world had seen fighters rise before, but no one like him. He wasn't just winning, he was dominating. The speed, the power, the raw aggression, it was something different. Something terrifying. There were no long, drawn-out battles. No back-and-forth struggles. Just Tyson, standing over his opponents, the fight already over before most people had even settled into their seats. But outside the ring, things were moving just as fast. The money came in waves. The fame hit like a storm. One day, he was just another kid trying to make it. The next, he was a global sensation. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Reporters, sponsors, celebrities, they all circled around, watching, waiting. And when you're that young, that famous, with that much power, the line between control and chaos starts to blur. At first, it was like a dream. Private jets, mansions, expensive cars. He could buy anything, go anywhere. The kid who once had nothing now had everything. But that kind of success, it doesn't come without a price. Because with the money and fame came something else: attention. Too much attention. Everyone wanted to be near him, to be part of his story. Some wanted to help, others wanted to take. And in the middle of it all, Tyson was trying to figure out who he really was. Boxing had given him an identity. In the ring, everything made sense. There were rules. There was structure. There was a clear goal: win. But outside, it was different. The people around him weren't trainers or sparring partners. They weren't there to make him better. Some were friends. Some weren't. And the ones who weren't, they knew how to play the game. They knew what he wanted to hear. When you're young, rich and famous, it's easy to trust the wrong people. And then there was the pressure, the expectations. He wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was a champion. And champions don't lose. At least that's what people said. The media, the fans, the promoters, they all built him up as something unstoppable. And the thing about being unstoppable, people start looking for ways to prove you're not. The training didn't stop. The fights kept coming. But something was different. The fire, the hunger that had once driven him, that need to fight, to prove himself, it started to shift. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't the same. The fights that had once felt like life or death were now just another part of the business. And boxing? It wasn't just a sport anymore. It was a machine. A machine that didn't stop moving, didn't stop pushing, didn't stop demanding more. And the machine didn't care if he was tired. It didn't care if his mind was somewhere else. It didn't care if the people around him weren't looking out for him. It just wanted the next fight, the next payday, the next show. Then came the distractions, the headlines, the chaos. The world outside the ring started creeping in. Suddenly, he wasn't just battling opponents, he was battling the weight of his own fame. Every move he made, every word he said, it all became part of the story. And the media? They loved a story. They loved building someone up. But even more than that, they loved tearing them down. The fights got harder. The competition got stronger. But the biggest battle, that wasn't happening in the ring. It was happening inside. The pressure, the expectations, the non-stop cycle of fame and fortune, it started taking a toll. Some days, it felt like the only place that still made sense was the ring. But even that was starting to change. Because the thing about being on top, there's always someone waiting to take your place. The undefeated, unstoppable Mike Tyson, he was about to face something he never had before. Not just a challenger in the ring, but something bigger. Something even he couldn't punch his way out of. The world was watching, waiting. And when it happened, it changed everything. The air in the arena was different now. It wasn't just excitement, it was anticipation. People weren't just there to watch another Tyson victory. They were looking for something else. A weakness. A moment. A sign that the unstoppable force could be stopped. And in the back of his mind, Tyson knew it too. The world had changed around him. The opponents stepping into the ring weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for history. Beating Tyson wasn't just about a title anymore. It was about being the first, the one who could do what no one else had done. And that pressure? It was different now. Before, it had fueled him. Now it felt heavier. The fights became harder. The rounds stretched longer. For the first time, there were moments, small moments, where he didn't look invincible. His punches still had power, but something was missing. That rage that had once consumed him, that had made him a monster in the ring, it wasn't burning as hot. But the outside world didn't slow down. If anything, it only made things worse. The distractions grew louder. The headlines got messier. Every part of his life became something for people to talk about, something to analyze, to twist, to turn into a story. Some of it was real. Some of it wasn't. But in the middle of it all, the one thing that had once felt like home, the ring was starting to feel different. And then came the fight that changed everything. The bell rang, and for the first time, Tyson wasn't the one in control. He was still strong, still fast, but his opponent wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. And as the rounds went on, something started to happen, something no one had seen before. Tyson looked vulnerable. The punches weren't landing like they used to. The speed wasn't the same. The power was there, but the precision, the relentlessness wasn't. And then, in a moment that sent shockwaves through the sport, Tyson went down. The crowd gasped. The world stood still. He had been hit before, sure. But this was different. He wasn't just rocked, he was on the ground. The referee counted. Tyson got up. But the damage had been done. The fight continued, but something had shifted. And when it was over, when the final bell rang, the impossible had happened. Tyson had lost. The world exploded. The media had its story. The fans had their moments. The unbeatable champion had been beaten. And for the first time, Tyson wasn't just fighting his opponents. He was fighting something inside himself. Because losing? That wasn't something he was used to. It wasn't something he knew how to handle. And in the days that followed, the questions started. Was this the end? Was he still the same fighter? Had the world finally caught up to Mike Tyson? The pressure that had always been there, the weight of expectations, the distractions, it all came crashing down at once. And when you build your whole life around being the best, what happens when you're not anymore? That was the real fight. The one that no one saw. The one that wasn't happening under bright lights, in front of millions. The one that was happening in his head every single day. The story wasn't over. Not yet. But the world had changed. And Tyson? He was about to find out what happens when everything you've built starts slipping away. The days after the loss felt like a blur. Everything seemed out of focus, like someone had pressed the reset button on his life, and he didn't know where to start. The fans, the media, the critics, they all had their say. The headlines were harsh, relentless, demanding answers to a question Tyson didn't even know how to answer himself. Was he still the Mike Tyson who could bring the crowd to its feet with a single punch? Or was he just a former champion, living off the scraps of his own glory? The gym, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The sound of gloves hitting the heavy bag, the rhythmic thump of feet on the canvas, it was all the same. But Tyson wasn't the same. He didn't move with the same confidence. The once unstoppable fighter was now second-guessing himself, doubting his every move. Every punch thrown felt like it could be the one that determined whether or not he could still make it back. But no matter how hard he trained, no matter how much effort he put in, the ghosts of his past kept haunting him. The moment he lost wasn't just about a title, it was about who he thought he was. And somewhere, deep inside, Tyson couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the world had been right all along. Maybe he wasn't as invincible as he'd once believed. Then came the whispers. Behind closed doors, trainers, former champions, and even those closest to him started wondering if Tyson's time was up. They had questions. He had no answers. What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he find that spark again? There were moments, just fleeting moments, when he'd catch a glimpse of what he used to be. That fire, that raw intensity, that insane drive. But it would always fade, like a dream slipping through your fingers just as you were about to catch it. But Mike Tyson didn't quit. Not yet. He didn't know how to quit. He'd been knocked down before, but he always came back. It was a part of him. But this felt different. There was no one clear enemy, no single fight to prepare for. It was all inside of him now, a battle that no one could see but him. The pain of defeat wasn't something he could punch away. It wasn't something he could outrun. The more he tried to fight it, the more it consumed him. People who once praised him started whispering doubts, both in the gym and in the streets. Even the most loyal fans began to ask the question, is Tyson done? It wasn't just a question about his career anymore. It was a question about his entire identity. Who was Mike Tyson if he wasn't the champ? If he wasn't the hardest puncher alive? And in the back of his mind, he could feel it, the urge to prove everyone wrong. To come back. To remind the world why they had once feared him. But what if he couldn't? What if that part of him was gone for good? What if the fire had burned out? Tyson didn't want to think about it, but it crept into his mind late at night, when the gym was empty, when the crowds weren't around. The longer he waited, the more the doubts grew. As the weeks turned into months, Tyson tried to push through. He trained harder. He ran further. He sparred longer. But the question lingered. Was it enough? Could he really make a comeback? Could he be the fighter he once was, or was that version of Mike Tyson forever lost to time? The media continued to ask the same questions. The fans continued to demand answers. And the world was watching, waiting, expecting. Then came the call. The one he didn't want, but couldn't ignore. The offer was on the table. Another fight. Another chance to reclaim everything. It was a fight with a challenger who didn't fear him. A fighter who had watched Tyson's rise, his fall, and now stood in front of him as the next great thing. The whole world would be watching. The fight would define Tyson's career, his legacy, his life. It was the perfect stage. But with it came a weight that felt heavier than ever. Tyson had always fought for the title. But now, this fight wasn't just about winning, it was about surviving. The pressure was mounting, the expectations growing with every passing day. People were waiting for him to fail. They were waiting for the old Tyson to return. And Tyson? Tyson didn't know if he could deliver. But the fight was set. The stage was ready. And soon, it would be time to step into the ring once again. The lights would be on. The crowd would roar. And Tyson would have to answer the question everyone was asking. Was he still the man? Or had he already lost everything that made him great? With every passing moment, the tension built. Tyson couldn't escape it. This wasn't just another fight. This was everything. The day of the fight arrived with a weight that Tyson couldn't shake off. The ring was the same. The lights, the crowd, the energy, everything was as it should be. But something felt different. It wasn't just the opponent across from him. It wasn't just the pressure to prove himself, it was himself. For the first time, Tyson wasn't sure if he could step into that ring and deliver the knockout he was known for. And the more he tried to shake off that feeling, the more it clung to him. The crowd cheered, the bell rang, and Tyson stepped forward. His legs felt heavy, like they were moving through quicksand, each step pulling him deeper into the doubt he had tried to bury. He saw his opponent calm and ready, his eyes focused, unwavering. Tyson could feel the world watching, waiting for him to fail. Every move he made, every punch he threw, felt like it was under the microscope. The pressure was relentless. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was like trying to fight a ghost. But as the fight wore on, Tyson began to feel a shift. His instincts kicked in. The raw power, the aggression, it was all still there. He felt it surge through him as he landed a few solid blows. The crowd roared. He could hear the chants, feel the adrenaline rushing back into his veins. Maybe, just maybe, he still had it. The fire was still there. Tyson was fighting not just for the title now, but for himself, to prove that he wasn't a has-been. He wasn't finished. But just as Tyson was starting to regain his confidence, something unexpected happened. The lights in the arena flickered. For just a second, the entire space went dark. A moment of confusion, a collective gasp from the audience. Tyson paused, caught off guard, looking around as the lights came back on. But in that split second of darkness, something strange occurred. Tyson's opponent was no longer where he had been. It wasn't a trick, wasn't some strategy. Tyson knew what he had seen. His opponent had disappeared. The crowd was still in a frenzy, unsure of what had happened. Tyson stood in the center of the ring, stunned, sweat dripping down his face. The referee called for a break, trying to regain control of the situation. But Tyson couldn't focus. His mind was racing. The fight wasn't over, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. The sudden blackout. The disappearance of his opponent? He couldn't ignore the chill that ran down his spine. Was it a trick? Had someone in the crowd pulled something off? Maybe it was a stunt, a mind game designed to throw him off. But why? Why now? Just then, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The arena plunged into darkness. A hush fell over the crowd, an eerie silence that felt unnatural. Tyson's heart pounded in his chest as he felt his way around the ring, unsure of what was going on. His mind was clouded, adrenaline mixing with confusion. Was this part of the plan? Was the opponent trying to mess with his head, or was there something deeper at play? Suddenly, a voice cut through the dark. A strange, distorted voice that echoed across the arena, though there was no sign of its source. "Mike," it said, the words chilling, unmistakable. Tyson froze. The voice spoke again, clearer this time. "You're not alone in this fight." Tyson's breath caught in his throat. His body tensed, every nerve on high alert. The voice sounded familiar, but it wasn't right. It wasn't someone in the crowd. It wasn't even anyone in the arena. It felt otherworldly. The crowd, too, was quiet still. The lights flickered once more, this time revealing a figure standing at the edge of the ring, someone Tyson didn't recognize. He wasn't sure how the man had appeared, how he had gotten there. The stranger stood motionless, staring at Tyson with an expression of deep intensity. Tyson took a step back, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He was no longer thinking about his opponent. His focus had shifted entirely. Who was this person? What did he mean? Tyson wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing. He was no longer in control of this fight. The crowd had begun to murmur, but their whispers were swallowed by the increasing tension in the air. The figure didn't move, but Tyson could feel the weight of his gaze, the pressure mounting with every passing second. This wasn't a fight for the title anymore. This was something bigger. Tyson's heart was pounding in his chest. He had faced his demons, the pressure of being the greatest, the pain of failure. But this was something he couldn't explain. It wasn't part of the plan. He had prepared for the fight of his career, the battle to prove he could still stand as the champion. But this wasn't just a fight. It was a challenge to everything he thought he knew. "Mike," the voice whispered again, this time softer, almost like a warning. "The world you know is changing. And so are you." And then, the voice returned, this time directly to Tyson. "You've fought hard, but you've been fighting the wrong battle." Tyson was frozen. The crowd was still silent. The only sound was his own breath, ragged, panicked, as he struggled to process what was happening. Who was this stranger? What did he want? And most importantly, why now? Why, at the peak of Tyson's comeback, when he thought he had everything in control, was the universe throwing him a curveball he couldn't understand? The figure in the ring finally moved, stepping closer, though Tyson didn't know whether to fight or run. He was stuck between confusion and instinct, unable to decide which action to take. The voice continued taunting him, pushing him further into uncertainty. "Do you really believe you're in control, Mike?" the figure asked, his voice dripping with both threat and truth. "Or are you just a pawn in a game you don't even understand?" Tyson's breath hitched. The world seemed to be spinning. He was in the ring. But he wasn't just fighting a man anymore. He was fighting a force that was much bigger than anything he had ever faced. And for the first time in his life, Mike Tyson didn't know what to do next. The stakes had just gone up, and Tyson had no idea if he was prepared to play this new game. The silence in the arena was deafening. The figure in the ring, the mysterious stranger, stood just a few feet away from Tyson, who was still frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The crowd had long since stopped murmuring, all of them captivated by the strange energy that seemed to hang in the air. Tyson's heart was racing, his mind a swirl of confusion and fear. Who was this man? What did he want? The figure's eyes were intense, unwavering, like they could see right through Tyson. The voice continued, but this time there was something different in it, something more personal, more direct. "You think you've fought your hardest battles, Mike, but you've only scratched the surface." The figure gestured to the arena around them. "This is just the beginning." Tyson's breath hitched. Every part of his body screamed to run, to escape, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. He couldn't take his eyes off the man, or whatever he was. It wasn't just the physical presence that unnerved him, it was the weight of the words, the challenge in his tone. Tyson had faced some of the toughest opponents in history, but this was different. This wasn't just about fighting for a title. This wasn't just about proving something to the world. This was about something much bigger, something far beyond his understanding. The man in front of him took another step closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You think you're the master of the ring," he continued, his voice low and chilling, "but the true fight, Mike, is not with your fists. It's with your soul." Tyson's mind was racing now. Was this some sort of mental game? Was it a test? A trap? He had fought for everything his entire life, but now, faced with this impossible scenario, he didn't know how to fight. How could he fight something intangible? "You're not just fighting for yourself anymore," the figure said, his voice almost a whisper now. "You're fighting for something much greater than you can comprehend. The question is, will you rise to it?" Tyson's body trembled. He wasn't just facing a strange opponent in the ring anymore. He wasn't just fighting for the title. He was fighting for his place in the world. He had spent so many years building his identity around the idea of being the toughest, the strongest, the baddest man on the planet. But now, in the face of this unknown force, everything he had known felt meaningless. And then, just as Tyson opened his mouth to say something, to ask the stranger what he wanted, the lights in the arena flickered once more. This time, they didn't just dim, they went out completely. Darkness swallowed the entire space. For a moment, there was nothing but pure silence. Then came the sound of movement footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the void. Tyson could feel his heart racing, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew this wasn't just a trick. It wasn't a game. Suddenly, the lights flashed back on, brighter than before. Tyson blinked against the harsh light, trying to make sense of the situation. But when his eyes focused, what he saw was nothing short of staggering. The figure was gone. Tyson blinked again, looking around in disbelief. The ring was empty. The crowd, too, was eerily still, as if they hadn't just witnessed a strange encounter. Everything was as it had been before, but something felt off. There was a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. And then, Tyson felt it, the familiar sensation of eyes on him. He turned quickly, his body tense, every muscle primed for action. But no one was there. It was as if the stranger had never existed. The crowd began to stir, confusion spreading like wildfire. Tyson, still reeling from the bizarre encounter, tried to process what had just happened. Had it been real? Was he imagining it? Was this some sort of psychological game designed to break him down? He had fought through many challenges in his life, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so surreal. And then, as if to confirm his doubts, a voice rang out from the back of the arena, distant but clear. "The real fight is coming, Tyson. Are you ready?" Tyson's blood ran cold. The voice was the same as the one that had spoken to him earlier. The same voice that had sent a chill down his spine. But where had it come from? Who was it? And most importantly, what did they want with him? The crowd, still confused, began to chant his name, hoping to bring back the energy of the fight. But Tyson didn't hear them. His mind was elsewhere. This was no longer just about the fight in the ring. This was something deeper, something that reached into every corner of his existence. He was still standing there, shaken, when a realization hit him. He had always thought he was in control of his destiny, that his fists were his weapon, his way of taking charge of his life. But this was something else. This wasn't about winning in the traditional sense. This wasn't about being the best fighter. It was about surviving, about rising above whatever forces had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. For the first time in his life, Tyson didn't know what the next move was. But he was sure of one thing: the fight was far from over. He wasn't just fighting in a ring anymore. He was fighting for his place in the world, and he would fight until he knew what the hell was going on. And as the lights flickered, one last time before dimming again, Tyson steeled himself. The battle had just begun. Little did he know, the true nature of the war ahead would test him in ways he never thought possible. But that would be a story for another time. Tyson's heart pounded as the darkness enveloped him once again, and the oppressive silence that had followed the last cryptic words weighed heavily on his chest. The arena was empty now, the deafening cheer of the crowd a distant memory. There was no one left to watch, no one to witness his internal battle. Just him, standing alone in the ring, wrestling with the ghosts of doubt that threatened to consume him. The chill in the air lingered, as if the very atmosphere was charged with something otherworldly, and Tyson instinctively took a step back. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Was this all some twisted psychological game? Had he been so consumed by his past, by his legacy, that his mind was playing tricks on him? But he knew it wasn't that simple. The voice had been real. The feeling in the pit of his stomach was real. The whispers in the dark, those were real. The stranger, the cryptic words, the eerie silence, it was all part of something far greater than him. And for the first time in his life, Tyson realized he wasn't in control of his own destiny. No amount of punches or fame or glory could prepare him for whatever this was. The weight of everything he had fought for in his career seemed insignificant in comparison. Sure, he had knocked out legends, pummeled opponents into submission, and built a reputation that would last through history, but none of that had prepared him for this moment, for this fight. He had always been a man of physical strength, a man who used his fists to conquer his problems. But now, in this foreign space, Tyson understood that this was a different kind of battle. It was a battle of the mind, of the soul, of the very essence of who he was. And whatever was waiting for him on the other side of this strange encounter, it wasn't going to be a fight he could win with sheer force. He had always prided himself on being the baddest man on the planet. But now, faced with the unknown, Tyson was reminded of his vulnerability. The uncertainty gripped him. Who could he trust? Where could he turn? And why was he still being pulled deeper into this strange vortex? As Tyson stood there in the center of the ring, wrestling with these questions, a realization slowly began to sink in. This wasn't just about surviving a fight. This was about understanding the fight itself. He wasn't just fighting against an opponent. He was fighting against his own demons, the ones that had haunted him for years. The lights flickered again, but this time there was no eerie voice. Instead, the arena was bathed in the soft glow of the lights that slowly came back to life. Tyson blinked, squinting against the brightness as his surroundings came into focus once more. The silence still lingered in the air, but it wasn't as suffocating as before. There was an odd stillness to it, like the calm before a storm. It was Cus D'Amato, his old trainer, the man who had shaped Tyson's career, who had been his guiding force in the boxing world, and whose death had left a hole in Tyson's heart. Tyson's breath caught in his throat. "Cus?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Cus smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've always been here, Mike," he said softly. "I've never really left." Tyson blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. What's going on? What's this all about? Cus's expression softened as he took a step closer. "You've always been searching for something, Mike. You've tried to fill that emptiness with victory, with fame, with power. But none of that is what you need. The real fight, the one that matters, is the fight within. You've been running from it for years, but now you have to face it." Tyson's mind raced. He wanted to argue, to push back against this revelation, but deep down, he knew it was true. Everything he had fought for, his world championships, his fame, his legacy, none of it had truly filled the void. He had been trying to escape from something he couldn't quite put into words, something that had always gnawed at him from the inside. Cus continued, his voice steady and calm. "You can't outrun your demons, Mike, but you can face them. You've always had the strength to do it. But this time, the fight isn't with your fists. It's with your heart." Tyson's chest tightened as the weight of those words sank in. He had spent his life building walls around his heart, shutting out the pain, the fear, the vulnerability. But now, standing there in the ring, with Cus's words echoing in his ears, Tyson realized that it was time to tear down those walls. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many questions, so much uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, Tyson felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. A flicker of understanding. The tension in the arena lifted slightly as Tyson turned away from Cus, looking out into the empty space. The crowd was still there, in his mind. They were waiting for him, not just as a fighter, but as a man, as someone who could finally confront the darkest parts of himself and come out stronger on the other side. Cus's voice came from behind him one last time. "You've got this, Mike. You always have. Now go and show them who you really are." Tyson took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. He knew the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was a journey he was ready to face. Not for the title, not for the glory, but for himself. For the man he had always been and the man he was becoming. With renewed determination, Tyson stepped out of the ring. The crowd may have been gone, the lights may have faded, but Tyson wasn't fighting for an audience anymore. He was fighting for his life, for his truth. And as the night stretched on, Tyson knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, he was ready. Because in the end, it wasn't about being the baddest man on the planet. It was about finding peace within himself,